very difficult to claim that the ANC has really done anything substantively in terms of economic transformation for workers. They say, well, there's this terrible old apartheid economy that we've been left with, that we're still struggling to transform, but at least we've had this wonderful redistributive state. And I was actually a little bit surprised. It came out at the same time as there was a World Bank report on South African welfare and things. And I was quite surprised that actually when you look at the macroeconomic statistics, there is a pretty high level of social spending in relation to GDP that actually compares favorably to a lot of these so-called pink tide economies, neo-developmentalist economies in Latin America. And there has been fairly substantial programs around housing, around electricity, some things around free basic access to water and various things. I think when you dig into any more detail around these issues, you will find that a lot of the time, even where the kind of spending figures might suggest something quite progressive in the policy, they've been very badly undermined by firstly the neoliberal design of the program that's been implemented, and also just a very poor quality of the actual kind of welfare that's been delivered. Not to say that there haven't been improvements in a lot of areas, but those statistics are always very contested in South Africa, and I think a lot of what you do hear from state agencies at least needs to be viewed kind of very critically. The social grants, I mean, absolutely are a vital lifeline. I mean, when you talk about an economy with 40% unemployment, there is, an enormous section of the working class that lives directly off the social grant system. So of course it would be it would be an absolute death sentence for a socialist movement to claim for a second that we would try and repeal social grants in any way. And of course, I mean, it's a slogan of the United Front that we have to, I mean, actually what the ANC is doing now is introducing some kind of secret austerity in the grants by increasing them below inflation, essentially. So I think it will be a critical struggle of any kind of united front to say that these grants need to be not only defended but expanded, because I mean they're a lifeline for a huge amount of the population, but they really are a pittance. They don't actually keep anybody at a standard of living much above the poverty line at all, and invariably. Again, because of these huge dependency networks, because of the huge unemployment rate, they're divided amongst, sort of 10 or 12 people living off a grant that's less than 100 euros a month. And these sort of things. So maybe to talk a bit about women's struggles, because of course, I mean, there's still such appalling situation for women in South Africa, and particularly working class women, in terms of the levels of violence, the levels of rape, the levels of everything that's being faced. And you're right to say that so many of the burdens of these struggles around migrancy, and that completely falls on the shoulders of women. Interestingly, there has been this transformation in the migrant labour system where before, as you said, the communities remained in the rural areas and these migrant workers were working on the mines. Now there's a situation where a lot of mine workers actually are supporting two families, one that lives on the mines and others that are based in the community. And the women's organizations living in the communities around the mines have, I mean, absolutely the vanguard of so many of the struggles that have taken place since everything erupted at Marikana. I mean, struggles around, justice for the mine workers, but also struggles around all the sorts of community issues that were not taken up by labor movements in the area. And I mean, yeah, in general, I would say that's one of the weakest areas where there has actually been pretty substantial levels of local struggle in South Africa. There's some sociologists that say we've had, the highest per capita amount of protests in the world, and these very much concentrated on issues of corruption and service delivery. Really, women's issues, I think, has been an enormous weakness of the left and progressives within the alliance and outside. And I really hope that is going to be an issue that will be strengthened. And I would say there's been positive signs in realizing the centrality of these issues by this kind of NACIT United Front process. So maybe to respond to a few things Terry was bringing up about the connections between these struggles. As I suggested at the beginning, there was the whole post-apartheid period is a complete divorce of labor from this enormous tide of social protest. And this was really the very hard line that was driven by the SSEP, to say that any protest action taking place outside of alliance structures is just some kind of imperialist agency, essentially. NUMSA and others, for all the fact that they definitely represented more of a kind of class struggle component within the alliance, were essentially faithful to this line, and it meant that there was this complete disconnect that's existed between these two levels of struggles. And I think that that is something for which we can absolutely commend them, is that the first steps that they took from the launching of the United Front process was, as the comrade said over here, launching of sort of conventions and indabas where they invited people representing all struggles across, all sorts of social struggles across different layers of society to come and present and to say that this United Front is really going to be finally about connecting these different struggles together. I mean, that said, there is, as I was alluding to, I think a lot of more concrete work to be done to go beyond this just kind of verbal aspiration of unity. And the reality is that has been somewhat of a stepping stone in the early processes of the United Front, is that NUMSA and others, who are very much the bedrock of this process, haven't fully succeeded in overcoming an attitude of proletarian centricity, of purely putting kind of labor issues at the heart of everything, and instead of simply saying that you want community struggles to come and join in labor struggles, but actually a much deeper process of involving workers in the myriad community and social struggles that have been going on around them. And so the comrade asked about regional links. I can't remember. I'm sorry, I must again express this terrible sub-imperialist South African attitude where I'm very unaware, and frankly the left in general is very poor at regional solidarity. I think that's something that needs to be a major focus of an emerging left in the country, is to rebuild those links, because we also have to be very aware of South Africa's particular role in Southern Africa as some sort of sub-imperial or small imperial power that reacts to its hinterlands in the way traditional imperialist powers did, to the export of goods, undermining of their industries, promoting South African corporations and the South African finance sector to penetrate into these economies, and using them as sources of cheap labor with massive immigration into the country. So I would say it's a critical area of struggle. But I'm not in a position to really comment on the political conjuncture in these regions or on what's been done so far to develop the links that I think are very important. Oh, sorry, before I move on completely, I wanted to just mention because you also asked about the links between EFF and NUMSA. And EFF was a lot better in the beginning at calling out to NUMSA and saying, and actually asking for meetings and that. NUMSA so far has refused to meet at all with the EFF, which on the one hand, there's a sort of sectarian element to it. On the other hand, this was a decision that was determined by tactical considerations based on the nature of their struggle in COSATU. As I said, it's a very complicated process of trying to win workers away from very deep-rooted loyalties to the ANC, and at this very sensitive point in the struggle where there was this unevenness in consciousness, where workers are sort of starting to be prepared to say that we need to build something outside of the ANC, but where a wide layer of those are still, arguing that the ANC will be the only ever mass organization, we need to fight inside it. If they went out all of a sudden and started meeting with EFF, it would have been, there's a lot of problems with that. I hope as these sort of splits develop and there's a more coherent formations begin to form outside, that those kind of linkages can be developed. Certainly, I think they're crucially necessary. Maybe just say one or two things about the role of sort of consciously Trotskyist groups. I would say still very small. Most of the small revolutionary parties would be active in the DLF in some way. There's people like the SWP's group and a few others. The one other that was significant, or sort of significant for a while outside, was the CWI affiliate. They're known, there was Democratic Socialist Movement. They had a number of activists that were quite crucial in mining worker sectors before these strikes ever happened. And so after Marikana, they were quite involved initially in running the workers' committees and various things, and they got a lot of kind of media attention and stuff. But they ended up completely jumping the gun, essentially, and as I understand, based on a directive that came from their international, that was, basically saying that we're in this new cycle of proletarian insurgency across the world, and now is the point to start forming parties. completely unreasonably, they went and formed this Workers' and Socialist Party as these sort of splits were in the early phases, and then went out to this Numsara union of 350,000 workers and said, look, we formed the vanguard, you need to take your place within the vanguard. And they were absolutely crushed. I mean, they received less than 6,000 votes in the election and kind of lost whatever base that they had built up in the minds before that. And frankly, I think that's representative of a sort of politics and a sort of tactics that is going to be completely unhelpful at the moment. And there are even groups within the DLF that I think have fallen back very much into this sort of politics of kind of imposing a vanguard, of kind of imposing what they believe are the kind of revolutionary set of ideas, and any point that they feel that the leadership or the rank and file within the United Front is not following the exact right line, they'll picket the meeting, or they'll take this kind of really, and I think it's just totally unhelpful when what we're doing right now is really trying to manage this very tense and difficult process of the split of the workers' movement from this kind of corporatist alliance. So yeah, I think so.
Can I just ask